welcome back to our show, and thank you for watching. You, our audience, are why we are the #1 show on Cable Access Network. And thank you for your phone calls, your emails, and your letters, and keep them coming with feedback, even if it's criticism, we don't mind. And today we have a great show. We have the blogger, the author, the founder of The Expired Meter. Thank you for being on our show.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Now tell us your name for the viewing audience.
My name is Mike Brockway. I also go by the nom de plume, the Parking Ticket Geek, and
Mike Brockway or the Parking Ticket Geek, and this is going to be a good show. We're going to have a lot of good information that's going to be practical for you to get out of parking tickets and maybe even get out of these camera tickets, which I'm going to need because I get some camera tickets. How did it start that you started this website, blog, The Expired Meter?
Yeah, it's kind of, when I was, years ago, I started getting a lot of parking tickets, and stupidly so. But then I started getting a lot of parking tickets that were unfounded and were not proper. And somebody who worked for the city was ticketing me. I was in a legal spot, and I got very angry about it. I said, well, you know what? I'm going to fight these. So I started looking up the law, and I went in and started fighting the tickets, and I started winning, and I started getting really good at it, which is really kind of like an odd thing to excel at. But I have a writing background, and I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I need to inform other Chicagoans about how to deal with parking tickets, how to fight them, what the best way.
Well, how did you fight them? So you parked in an area that was something ambiguous?
What it was this particular space. I had an office on Lincoln Avenue, and there was areas that were unmarked, that were unmetered, and some of the ticketing people, the parking enforcement aides, would come by and say, well, you didn't feed the meter. Well, the signs said that I wasn't in the metered spot, or they would say, well, that's a tow zone because it's not in the metered spot. So they would write me all sorts of tickets. But signs are what are most important. You have to follow the signs when you're parking. So if there are no signs restricting parking, you can park there. And so I was always parked in a legal spot because I just followed the signs. But the parking enforcement aides, at least in that area, were very aggressive, and they just wrote me a bunch of tickets. So I would go in there and I would just fight the tickets over and over again, and I got experience doing it. I became popular at parties because people say, well, tell me how I can fight the tickets. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to write a book. And the best vehicle, the vehicle I thought would work well for me would be, doing a blog. And every day, if you have that discipline of sitting down and writing about something, I thought maybe after the end of the year, I would have a book and I could maybe try to publish it. But what happened in the meantime was the Chicago parking meter lease deal came around, and I started reporting on that.
Perhaps the biggest scandal and con job in the history of Chicago.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Mayor Daley has sullied himself by putting that deal forward.
I think that Mayor Daley sullied himself with John Burge, the pension crisis, high crime, high taxes. I mean,
but this appeals to like the common person, right? I'm not denying all those things you're saying, but this is something that affects people on a daily basis,
without a
regular basis, and we have 1.3 million.
And I think it was the last camel on the back that even people that were somewhat favorable to Daley or overlooked some of his other issues.
Correct.
And I think this is one of the reasons he didn't run.
Well,
because I don't think he could have won. I think he would have lost.
I think you're right, and the deal keeps on. As we move forward, we find out things about the deal that restrict us and impairs the city. And for example, trying to, if you want to do any kind of rezoning and putting a loading zone in, well, that's going to cost the city money if they don't replace it with another space or compensate the meter company. Or there was the issue where too many people were using disability placards to park for free, and by the contract, Chicago parking meters could send a bill to the city, and the city would have to pay those tens of millions of dollars.
But where was the contract review on this? I mean, how did somebody not get these points?
See, the due diligence on this whole thing was terrible, and whoever looked over it from the legal standpoint.
But they had outside legal counsel,
correct.
And they have a whole corporation council of dozens and dozens. I don't know how many people work there, but I think maybe hundreds of workers in their
Mara
corporation
Georges
council.
was the corporation counsel at the time, and if she signed off on it, she did a terrible job.
I think she may have criminal or at least civil liability of fraud in these things, because here, she signs off on it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
she's supposed to be a good lawyer. She doesn't see all these things that are terrible for the city of Chicago. But not only that, then she goes for the law firm that did the parking meter. Isn't that a conflict of interest?
One would think it happened after it, but obviously there seems to be some kind of quid
But
pro
I
quo
mean,
going on.
It's still a conflict of interest. I mean, should be a waiting period of a couple years or something. I mean,
I don't know what the law is on that, but it sure looks shady. That's for sure.
well, I think ARDC should look into it. I mean,
Well, there's a lot of aspects of this whole deal that should be looked into.
well, David Hoffman, the Inspector General of the City of Chicago at the time, did a report, and he said the city lost $1 billion with a B. I hate to sound like Dr. Evil, but it was $1 billion with a B dollars.
Right.
That's a lot of money.
It's a heck of a lot of money. And the length of the contract was 75 years, which is even for people who are like myself, pro-privatization, that's entirely too long for a privatization deal. It could have been formatted in such a way where they could have done a revenue share, where they could have said, let's do a 25-year deal and we'll split the revenue.
Well,
And-
how privatization, though, works in a free market model is one, competition. There was no competition.
Correct.
And two, choice. There's no choice.
Transparency as well.
Transparency. So in that model, a free market model of where privatization, the privatization that's done in the city of Chicago doesn't have any of the elements that at least theoretically would make privatization work well. And privatization hasn't worked all that well in the city of Chicago.
No, not here. But what's interesting is that Chicago's failure in this area has actually served as a model for other municipalities, large ones too, as what not to do.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken, Cincinnati just signed a privatization deal, and for the parking meters, and they basically said, well, we just basically did what the opposite of what Chicago did, and they actually made more. They actually got more value from Xerox, who did the deal with them, than Chicago did. They actually made, if you compared the deals, they made out way better than Chicago did from a financial standpoint.
So they've gotten money now over the placards for the handicapped, the disabled placards of people, so because of supposed fraud of the people who had them.
Right.
Now these are placards like somebody made, or they're
No, they're placards that the Secretary of State issues to people who are handicapped, and the law's been changed though. The law is changing as of 2014. So there were placards where people who were handicapped could park for free. The law was stated that any kind of handicap, right? So now they've changed the law. They made it much more restrictive, where the normal blue handicap placards cannot be used to park for free. You have to have a special yellow and blue one, checkered, and essentially you have to be handicapped in such a way that you cannot use the meters, meaning you can't bend over or you're in a wheelchair.
But how is that the city of Chicago's fault that some people that may have some mobility use the handicap placard? I mean, it makes no sense to me.
Well, but that's what the contract said.
Right.
So again, we the city signed the contract with all these bad things in it, and we're still on the hook. It's a contractually, we're contractually bound to follow those. What is
now
laid
we've
out in the
lost money
contract.
in other ways too, isn't that correct? Haven't they sued us?
Right. There's what's called true up or closures. What happens is, for example, if let's say ComEd has to do some work on a block, and they have to take out all the parking meters, like they block it off so people can't use the metered spots. So for as long as those spots are out of commission, Chicago Parking Meters can bill the city for how long those metered spots were taken
That's
out of
crazy.
service. Or if there was some kind of impact to the value of the system through taking spots out. Like for example, if they took out spots downtown, those are the highest value parking meters, and they would be billed for that. And now the ways to rectify that would be to either replace it with more spots or pay Chicago Parking Meters. And so that was a bill for, well, let's put it this way, between the disabled parking bills and the bills for true up or closure, it was somewhere around $60 million. Now, they renegotiated that, and I know it's a lower figure, I don't know what that is, but they renegotiated with this second round of the revisions, or as I say it, the parking meter remix, where we got free Sunday parking, which is not obviously free. There's no such thing as a free lunch, nor is there anything close to being free parking on Sundays, because what they did is they extended the hours for parking enforcement. So now, starting back in the summer, you have to pay the parking meters till 10 p.m. instead of 9 p.m. like it was before. And then in River North, you have to pay till midnight. So in my estimation, I think we're worse off for having these free Sundays and extending the
Now, I heard they were
parking
even
hours.
parking, because it was kind of sacrosanct in Chicago that you could park in front of churches and the like, and go to church. But they were part of the reason they gave the Sundays is so many people were going to church and they were getting ticketed.
Correct. But see, if you look at it in the aggregate, yeah, there's a few areas by churches where people, no one wants to go to church, especially, and have to run out and feed the meter halfway through the service. Understood.
But I think also if you're going downtown and you go to a club at 9, 10 o'clock at night, you don't want to get out and feed the meter. If you go there at 8 or 9, have dinner, and then you're going to a club and dancing or drinking, you don't want to go feed the meter at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. That's just silly.
Well, downtown the meters are 24/7, like in the Loop area, like right down, right where all the tall buildings are.
What, you mean they always have to be fed?
24 hours a day. That's in the core center, the Loop.
That's crazy.
It's the way the deal is structured, right?
That's crazy.
Now, once you get outside that, the rates are not only lower, but you still have to pay till midnight in that, essentially in the River North district.
But I think it hurts people who want to go to dinner.
It does.
Sometimes restaurants, there's a line to wait.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember one time I was going to dinner, I think it was Mother's Day or whatever it was. I remember I kept on having to go out because we were there, we were enjoying ourselves, we're spending some time in the restaurant.
Right.
And the meter only lasts like a certain amount of time.
Usually 2 hours.
Yeah. And sometimes you could be somewhere for more than 2 hours.
Mm-hmm. Right. But, well, in some cases, they're making, like some aldermen are asking for the meters to be extended to 3 hours, which is good. This is especially problematic at theaters. Like you're going to the Steppenwolf or any of the theaters in Chicago. Some of these plays will go more than 2 hours, and no one wants to leave the play because you're not going to get back in if you have to go out and feed the meters. So there have been some accommodations made in some of these theater districts where the meters were extended for a 3-hour period of time.
Now, I mentioned to you before the show, and I have an idea. I think that the federal government, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, has to investigate this deal, because I truly believe that Mayor Daley, Billy Daley Jr., Mara Georges, and others got quid pro quo, which is illegal, and got benefit at the expense of the taxpayers of the city of Chicago and the people who drive and park in the city of Chicago, and also the business of the city of Chicago that lose business because of the parking. And then the vacant lots, because some people don't want to bring business here because it's the highest, most expensive parking rates in North America. So this is a detriment to business. And I think there's fraud, and I think it should be criminally investigated. I think there could be a civil suit. And I think many of the aldermen have abrogated their duties as aldermen in one, voting for it and not doing their due diligence and studying it, but also not trying to revisit it, subpoena documents, and really look at the deal. Because like you call it, the remix really isn't that much better. I mean, ostensibly not having the pay on Sundays might be good in and of itself, but what else it's giving, I think, is horrible.
Well, there is an aspect to the remix, as I call it, and that is that we have better access to the data from Chicago parking meters.
Right.
So it allows us the city to make better decisions as far as the infrastructure. So, for example, in the 32nd Ward, there was a move to put in what's called a people spot. And it's essentially kind of, it would take up 1 or 2 metered spaces, and it would be kind of an area where people could hang out and sip coffee or just read the paper. Kind of an interesting concept, but they had to, in order to take those 2 spots out, they had to find other spots within the ward that they had to replace it with. Before, they didn't have that information where they could kind of figure out what they can do with this and how to address these type of issues. And now they allegedly have the data that will allow us to do that and not have to come out of pocket for tens of millions of dollars in order to compensate the company for these spots that are taken out of commission. So all that kind of, that aspect to it is a positive, and I think from that aspect it's good. And they also were able to negotiate that bill that was originally about $60 million between the 2 different issues, and they brought it down. I can't remember what that number was, but they did get some quid pro quo from Chicago parking meters in order to lower that bill. So from that aspect, it was good. I believe the free Sunday parking is essentially political. It's basically saying, hey, everybody, I did this for you. Now, when I run for mayor again in 2015, that you'll vote for me because I gave you free Sunday parking, which seems pretty pathetic to me. But I believe that was strictly political. It had nothing to do with anything else but that.
Well, it's terrible, whatever it is. It's horrific. But what kind of business? What business? I have a small business myself. I don't know if you're in business, but there's plenty of people I know in business. Has a guarantee that no matter what, you make money.
Right.
So if I'm a baker and the cost of flour goes up, now I have some automatic system that makes sure that I make more money.
Yeah.
Or people are going gluten-free and they don't want to buy my donuts or cakes. Now that's insanity.
It was probably one of the most one-sided contracts in the history of Chicago.
Well, and one way to get out of a contract is unconscionability, and I think it's unconscionable. I think it's truly unconscionable, this contract, and I think there should be a legal challenge to the contract based on fraud and duress and coercion and unconscionability. It's horrible. So now, let me shift for a second to these camera
the speed
tickets,
cameras.
the speed cameras.
Right.
Well, the speed and also the
Red light.
cameras. One, and I guess it goes without saying, they're about revenue, not safety.
That's my belief in general. Now, not to say that they don't have any.
Well, the statistical evidence, the studies didn't indicate they did have any impact on safety.
Well, there's two issues here. First of all, with the red light cameras, there are multiple studies, and some say they have no impact, and some say they do have an impact. Okay.
But the ones in Chicago have said there's no impact.
That's correct. There was a professor from the University of Illinois in Chicago who did a study of crash data from Illinois Department of Illinois Department of Transportation, and seemed to indicate that there was no real impact by the cameras.
But in some of the suburban areas, there were some studies indicated that it did slightly increase safety.
Well, see, it's hard to say. In some cases, they saw decreases in crashes. In some places, they saw increases in crashes.
Right.
So again, it's kind of like one of this mixed bag.
Well, and some of the increase in crashes, what I understand, is if somebody's in a turn lane, for example, but somebody wants to make sure they're not taking the light, you had people that were not wanting to get a ticket and just racing through or stopping or whatever else that were causing accidents.
Right. Now, one of the main issues as far as the red light cameras, in my perspective, is that it's a lot about yellow light timing. Now, the federal standard for yellow light times is basically 3 to 6 seconds. Okay. So Chicago has set their yellow light times at traffic lights at 3 seconds, the bare minimum. There are studies out that show that when you lengthen the yellow light time, not only do more people make it through the red light safely, but you reduce crashes because of that, and then you increase safety. So there's like 6 to 10 studies that show this, but the city refuses to actually even consider extending yellow light times.
Because they catch less people on the cameras and make less money.
Well, that's my belief on it, because there's a bill that is going to be introduced for the 3rd year in a row. Senator Dan Duffy, who's a Republican from Barrington, and he's trying to institute this law that would add a second of yellow light time to every red light camera in the state. And his belief, based on the studies, is that it would reduce red light running and improve safety. Last year when it was up in Springfield, the mayor and the city actively fought against it.
And what was their stated reason?
They didn't have a stated reason.
Well, then it was to make money.
Correct.
Yeah,
right.
there's
So
no doubt about it.
To me, it's very hypocritical to say we have these cameras here because we want to improve safety, but then when there are things that they could do that actually show you can improve safety, they don't embrace it.
But it seems that the leaders of Chicago are the epitome of hypocrisy.
Well, that's the understatement of the last decade, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yes,
so
I
how
agree.
can you get out of these camera tickets? I've heard that there's a spray.
Well,
I've
the
seen it
spray,
online.
the spray we know for sure does not work. Okay, that's from all the evidence that does not work. Now there's a license plate cover. There's several things. There's a license plate cover that's a lenticular lens. So if you're looking at it from behind, a police officer or another car can see it perfectly. It's clear. But at the angle of where the camera is from, shooting like kind of from the side and down, the lenticular nature of the plate obscures the last 1 or 2 digits of the license plate, and therefore they can't identify who was actually, what vehicle went through that red light if it went through, or the speed camera. That's a theory. It sounds like it works to me, and the reason why I think it works is because recently, within the last 2 years, the state passed a law prohibiting those type of license plate covers.
Right.
But they're not illegal in Chicago. Those type of covers are not illegal in Chicago if one agrees that home rule would, be in application here.
Right.
So, and the plate cover law is not enforced in the city of Chicago. So theoretically, you could have one of those and it would work. There's another product, I believe it's called the plate protector, and essentially this is perfectly legal. It's a bent piece of plastic that, again, does the same thing. It blocks the view of the camera for the last 1 or 2 digits of your license plate. And that there's no legal prohibition against using that. There's another product which I think is again perfectly legal. It's called it's manufactured by a company called Cobra, which is a Chicago-based company. They still make CB radios. That's how they got into business. They made CB
They have
radios.
other car accessories too.
They do. And so iRadar is basically a GPS-enabled system that will warn you when you're close to one of these cameras. And it'll say, like, hey, if a speed camera's coming up, it'll say, hey, slow down. You don't want to get a speed camera ticket. Or it'll show you where a red light camera ticket is, gives you a warning, so you can change your behavior and make sure you don't violate the law.
Are there any apps for?
There is. So it's a combination of an iPhone or an Android app and a piece of hardware. You can download the software, the app for free, and use it just off the phone, but it works best when you have the actual iRadar unit, which their lowest end unit is like $99. Well, that's less than the cost of a red light camera ticket or a speed camera ticket. So to me,
me and you have to talk after the show. I got to get all these write down all this information. So, all right, go on.
So those are some of the main ways that people are embracing.
And some of them are clearly legal, but there is a state law against one of the type of covers.
Right, and so yes, it's illegal. The plate covers are illegal.
Now, what is the consequence
of having one of those?
Yeah.
I don't know what the fine is. I believe it's probably a $50 or $75 fine if you're caught with one of those. But based on my experience, it is never enforced or rarely enforced. I've never heard of anybody having one of those type of lenses, one of those covers have a ticket. There is a general law against tinted plate covers, meaning like a yellow tint or a gray tint, a smoke tint, but there's no prohibition against a clear cover in the city of Chicago. So if you by chance would get a ticket for a plate cover, and your plate cover was clear, you just fight it on the basis that it was clear and not tinted. The municipal law is not the same as the state law. It's not consistent. It has a slightly different language. And so if you get that ticket, I think you could fight it and beat it pretty easily.
Okay. So let's talk about beating tickets like you've done. So if you get a parking ticket, the key is, where are the signs?
That's the main indicator of what's going on, okay? So,
and there are areas in the city, I don't want to say them on the show because then somebody may go put meters there. And there's some areas where there's some very good restaurants, I'll tell you after the show, where there's no meters.
Right.
And luckily there's no meters for whatever reason. They got lucky, or it's an area where they didn't think they'd make a lot of money. I don't know what it is. But there are still areas in Chicago where there's no meters.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, if you get a parking ticket, the first thing to do is look at the ticket and make sure that the facts are correct. For example, I've gotten out of tickets because people wrote the wrong make of the car. I was driving a Toyota and they wrote Chevy. Okay, well that's an improper ticket because the facts have to be correct on the ticket, or they put the wrong address. And I don't mean the wrong address like within 2 digits, but meaning, let's say you were parked at 3200 North Clark Street and they put 1200 North Clark Street. Okay, so you bring in a receipt from the place you were at, the store or whatever, or you take pictures of where you were at and say, look, I wasn't at 1200, I was at 3200. You wrote the ticket wrong, or the direction was wrong. A friend of mine got a ticket for being on East Michigan Avenue. Well, there is no East Michigan Avenue. It's north or south. So he got out of the ticket because he said, hey, where's this fictional East Michigan Avenue? So they have to dismiss the ticket when there are factual errors on it. And so you have to look and make sure there aren't any factual errors, because that's an easy way out.
So my viewing audience, grab a pen and tell a friend, okay? and write this down. So number one, you said, is if the sign doesn't say there's metered parking or there's a tow zone, you can park there. Number two, if there's a factual error, the make of the car, the location of the place. What are some of the other ones?
Make and model.
Make and model,
expiration,
different address.
Expiration date on your sticker. If they write the wrong sticker expiration, that's another way you can have it dismissed.
Okay. Wrong expiration date. So keep these details in mind. Go to the blog, The Expired Meter. What's the exact website?
TheExpiredMeter.com.
TheExpiredMeter.com. Very simple. You've seen it on our screen at times during the show. Go to the website and learn from this very interesting gentleman. Again, grab a pen and tell a friend, or tell a friend and grab a pen, whatever way you want it to do it, and write these things down to get out of parking tickets, to get out of camera tickets, and to make yourself more knowledgeable and effective in the city of Chicago. So now, do you have any experience getting out of any of the camera tickets? I know you said you haven't got any camera tickets.
I've never had a red light camera ticket, and I hope to God I don't get any speed camera tickets. I know where they are, and I always drive very safely, in particular around these areas.
There's so many
there are
red light cameras, it's hard to know where they all are.
There's 384 cameras at 191 locations, so they are all over. And that's why something like the Cobra iRadar is a great thing. If you're not familiar, it'll tell you where they are.
Right.
If you're using it properly. And then there's going to be, this year there's going to be 50 speed camera locations installed, and then another 50 in 2014. So that's going to be at 200 plus speed cameras around the city. Next year we will become right now we're the red light capital of the world, the city with the most red light cameras, and by the end of next year we'll be the speed camera capital of the country as well.
Now in 2010 I was activated to go to the U.S. Army. And through my training and travels, I was in Washington, D.C., San Antonio, Tacoma, Honolulu. And not one of these cities had these onerous sometimes it was 50 cents or something very de minimis, or there was free parking all over the place, or they had parking lots, or it was some minimal cost. The city of Chicago is one of the worst cities.
It is the most expensive city.
The most expensive city, yet we don't even have the kind of congestion that New York has,
right,
or the kind of Hollywood status that LA has. And I mean, why are we the most expensive? And yet we're the most expensive and we're still going bankrupt.
Well, because the parking meter lease deal, again, because we're not getting that revenue. I mean, they're making, the last time I checked, about $100 million a year in revenue from the receipts from the parking meters.
So if they're $100 million a year, and how long's the lease again?
75.
So they're going to more than make up their money.
They definitely will. They definitely will.
So and we're not losing $1 billion. I mean, we're going to be losing, it looks like, about $6.5 billion.
There are estimates anywhere between $1 to $6 billion over the entirety of the.
And even if you didn't raise the rates, we're still losing about, or raise them smaller to be about $2 billion, or
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Meter rates actually needed to go up in the city of Chicago, but the way they did it was improper and wrong, because the thing about meter rates is that you want the meter rates to be allowing people to park affordably, but not make it too expensive where they don't want to park, okay? Because here's the thing, in the congested areas like, let's say, Lakeview or Lincoln Park, the retailers want turnover. They don't want you hanging out all day, parked and not let other customers come through. So there should be a balance. Now, there's some areas of the city where $2 an hour is way too expensive. No one's going to park there. I mean, if you drive around the city, you can see this. Like, hey, there's a bunch of meters. There's nobody parked there. So what they should have done is had a range, basically, and basically supply side parking meter rates. Because it doesn't make any sense to have these flat rates. It's actually, I would argue that $2 an hour in Lakeview at Clark and Belmont is too cheap. And it's hard to find parking around there. They need to raise the rates in those areas. But $2 an hour it's the same rate if there are.
But if you go to South Chicago or Englewood,
it's the same price, right?
Right, but it should be lower.
It should be lower. They
Right.
should bring it down. Now, for example, like if you rent a 1-bedroom in Lakeview area, you're going to pay